Scott. Good. How are you doing? I'm good. Good to see you. Are you awake? I slept well last night. Yeah, it's good. Excellent. Yeah. Okay. Two.
Good morning, everyone. Before we get started, we would need a minute taker. I'm looking for volunteers, and also someone to act as a Java scribe and basically answer any questions that turn up on Java. This is a great opportunity for any of you who haven't been actively involved in this working group before to join in, instead of looking at some of the younger faces. I really am looking for a volunteer for a minute taker. Okay, we have a Java scribe. That only leaves the big job of meeting note taker open, if anyone is interested. Okay. Rewarding, not big. Rewarding task.
Is this on?
First session TV issues.
Let's start. Good morning. Maybe for some people, either early morning or night. So welcome to the IETF99 working group. This meeting is under the note rel, which essentially says everything you say or you write is under the other stuff there. Here's the proposed agenda. Update of Bp Dis, Bp Sac, TCPCL. We put previously custody transfer discussion there, but we found that in any way it will be discussed in the first presentation by Scott. So we essentially suggest that we remove this agenda item and then add it during the first presentation by Scott. Unless we have any issues. And at the end, EMA architecture, not protocol, presentation. Any other business or change to the agenda? No?
Ed has pointed out that he doesn't have new slides for the asynchronous management architecture presentation. He basically wants to cover some of what he would like to propose, so he hasn't done any new slides because he's done all his slides for Bp Sac instead. So it should be a fairly short piece because most of us are familiar with what he's proposing anyway, so it's more of a discussion piece for him. We need a minute taker. I'm going to appoint one. Vicky, thank you very much. Okay, so I was looking at the milestones. Yeah. Okay, so if you look at the DTN data tracker, you can see that we have a set of milestones which are charted items, and of the work that is currently actively in progress, apparently we were going to finish 50/50 BIS and TCP CLv4 by December 2016. Now, obviously that hasn't happened. These milestones aren't fixed in stone. They're aspirational, but obviously we are slipping on this. And the same, the AD would like to point out that this is a surprise to him for some reason. The main point of this slide is not to say, oh my God, we're slipping on this. It's to point out that these are key items that we're still working on, and there is some pressure to make progress, because if you look at the next slide, these are some of the other items that we have on the charter that are hanging, waiting for the core building blocks to complete. So there is some pressure to the primary authors and the working group to really get, going back one slide, RFC 50/50 BIS, TC. Is there a problem? No.
Well, it's gonna. It's a little wavy.
It's good. We have a wavy main projector for those listening. We need to get 50/50 BIS and TCP CLv4 done. They've been in last call once. They've dropped out of last call in light of changes that the working group and the main author team have wanted to make, which is fine, but we do need to get these finished. So that's less of a demand on the author teams, it's more of a demand on the rest of the working group to really please have a look at these documents. Give them even a light review. I'm looking at some of the younger guys in the room as well as the old hands and say, have a read. If there's stuff you don't understand, if you don't see why it's there, please ask. It may be an omission, there may be a valid reason for it, but a good bit of discussion on this is productive at this stage, and then we can push it back up the RFC queue and really get these moving. The other two items at the bottom of the slide, custody, obviously Scott is going to talk about the splitting out of custody out of the core 50/50 BIS. That will, I can imagine, will take a fair amount of time this morning. The other thing that came up over the last two meetings was bundle security protocol is relevant in this context. It may not be applicable to all users of bundle protocol, but there are those out there who want some way of securing bundle protocol, and without it, I think we would get serious questions from the IESG of why are you releasing a protocol that cannot be secured in a standard way. Okay, I'm sure Scott is, I'm looking at Scott nodding at this point, I'm sure there will be ways that we can say, you can encrypt your payload and effectively bundle encapsulation will give you end-to-end encryption as a lightweight encryption, but in the same way that IP Sec helps IP or works alongside IP, the proposal is that bundle security protocol acts as a Bp Sac, hence the name. So that is another critical early delivery from this working group. So, and given it's security related, that needs some better review. There needs to be some visible comment on that document. I know it's been reviewed in other places from the IETF, but we do need some good feedback from the IETF themselves. Otherwise, as this starts to go up to the security groups, they'll say, okay, you say it's been reviewed. We see no evidence of that. We see no chatter on the working group mailing list about this. So this is me pleading with those in the room and those on the audio stream and those in the working group. Please, can you have a good look at Bp Sac and 50/50 BIS and TCP/CL? These are the next items, charter items, that we have not really started working on. I know there's various within the room who have opinions and some ideas about neighbor discovery, have knocked up drafts so far on things like key management. How do you manage DTNs? And I know Ed's going to speak about an architecture he's had kicking around for a while. There's also addressing in a wider scope. How do we handle multiple addresses for multiple DTN domains? Are we going to try and enforce a single naming scheme? There's opinions circulating on this, but they all need really BP, BIS finished. We need the basic building blocks in place so that we can build on them. So, yeah, they've got early 2017 dates. It's not happening, but you need to be aware that these are milestones that we have to deliver on. So, does anyone have any comment about the fact that we are delayed? Okay.
Scott Burley, just one point that I'll bring up now and not emphasize later on, which is that bundle and bundle encapsulation and Bp Sac are not alternatives. Bundle and bundle encapsulation security depends on Bp Sac existing, so it's not like it supplants it in any way. Bp Sac is required in any case.
I stand corrected. So up first is Scott.
This is great. I can see it. Oh. And is there a switch for this? Test. Oh, okay. It's on. Good. Okay. Thank you. Okay. I'll try doing this. Yeah. It's not going to do anything if I do. Okay. Good. Okay. I will do the next thing. Okay, good. Okay. Okay. Good. All right. Thank you. I'm Scott Burley. I'm here to talk about a couple of things. The latest draft of the BP BIS specification, and as part of that, a discussion of custody transfer and a way that we might separate custody transfer from the bundle protocol itself. So next slide. I think this is the only slide on BP BIS, which is essentially that the seventh draft of this specification was posted in middle of June. I believe that this draft reflects whatever we had reached in the way of consensus on all the comments that had been received on the sixth draft, except that there still needed to be authoritative references to the CRC specs, because I was unsuccessful in running down good references, and anybody who was able to do that, I think there was some traffic on the net about some possible references, and I'm happy to take that and incorporate that into the spec. And just an oversight, I stupidly failed to move the CRC to the end of the canonical block header, and that was just an oversight. That I will fix that. Also, I think there were a couple of small comments that came in on the email list in the last couple of weeks, and those I'm quite happy to incorporate. So at this point, I believe the seventh draft of the BP spec is reflects everything that we had agreed on. In addition to that, it reflects what I think was a tentative agreement to extract custody transfer from the bundle protocol spec itself and define it in a separate document. There are a couple of ways that we've discussed doing that. One is retaining custody transfer as an extension block and as a set of modifications, insertions that would go into the bundle protocol specification itself in several places. And I think 3 or 4 months ago, we posted a sample draft of how you might do that. Sometime after that draft went out, it occurred to me, I think I've got a better way of doing it. I think we could do it in a simpler and I think more powerful way if we combine custody transfer with bundle and bundle encapsulation and do it as essentially a new reliable convergence layer protocol. And so I'll talk about that for a few minutes. Next slide. This idea went out in a draft that I posted under my own name rather than the working group name, because it's just me thinking out loud at this point. And the idea is move custody transfer out of bundle protocol and standardize bundle and bundle encapsulation and make custody transfer a feature of bundle and bundle encapsulation, since the idea of making custody transfer a reliable convergence layer protocol entailed encapsulating in bundles anyway. And it dawned on me, why not combine the two things? I think there are a number of advantages in doing that, and I'll come to those in a moment. So in this formulation, custody transfer would be an optional feature of bundle and bundle encapsulation, and once again turning BIBE into a reliable convergence layer protocol along the lines of TCP/CL and LTP that would be able to operate over disrupted links, which I believe no other reliable convergence layer protocol that I know of can do. I think this is potentially very useful. Next slide. So the advantages of this approach, one is that I think what I'm aware of as the key benefit of custody transfer is preserved by doing this. Now, I've not been a great fan of custody transfer for some time. There are a number of reasons for that. The one is that custody transfer reliability relies on retransmitting the entire bundle, no matter how big it is, rather than portions of the bundle. And another is that retransmission is driven entirely by expiration of timeouts, and the timeout interval is something that is, I will argue, impossible to calculate in the RFC 5050 world, because custody transfer, no node is required to take custody transfer, so you don't know which node is supposed to acknowledge it, so you have no idea how long it'll take for the bundle to reach that node and come back again. So anything that you do in custody transfer in RFC 5050 in terms of retransmission is by definition less than efficient. It'll always retransmit either too early or too late because you can't do it accurately. I think that for these reasons, I've been saying for a long time, we should just use reliable convergence layer protocols instead. And I think that is still the case, but Keith Scott has made the point a number of times that there are use cases where nothing but custody transfer can do the job,
because there is no reliable convergence layer protocol available for some of the use cases he's been looking at. You really need a reliable convergence layer protocol that handles transmission over unidirectional and possibly disrupted links, and nothing but custody transfer does that. So this work is an attempt to reconcile those two, I think, two entirely valid points of view. And let me recognize Jörg Ott, who has something to say at this point.
Yeah, Jörg Ott. I have a semi-semantic question here. It occurs to me that TCP especially when you look at this end-to-end model of the internet, secures bytes on the wire, but doesn't do anything how they are being handled at the receiver side. So it's a reliable transfer. It's not a reliable pick up storage and whatnot. And so comparing custody transfer, which also says something about durability in the receiver side storage, may be marginally or subtly different from transport semantics. And just wondering whether you are taking those two semantic aspects apart, or whether you are intentionally or unintentionally mingling them a bit.
So it takes some discussion to exactly narrow this down, but I will, I think, argue that the approach that I'm advocating here unifies those two concepts. That it provides, depending on how you implement it, it provides security on a hop-by-hop basis, and provides reliable transmission that is compatible with that security.
But it is supposed to guarantee also that you're going to have enough space after having received something reliable and keep it. So I'm not worried about the security part. I'm worried about the reliability part and storage. So if you get the next bundle, and if you have taken custody, you can't evict it and drop it on the floor because you have taken custody. Whereas just the fact that you have received something reliably, completely, and so on, still would allow you to drop it. And this is the semantic difference I'm wondering. And I'm not saying that this is bad to combine the two. I'm just wondering whether this is happening intentionally, whether we should spell this out clearly.
I'm inclined to think we should spell it out clearly, right? And I think that that there is that implication, and I think we should confront that implication and make sure that we understand what would evolve from that. I think we need to be aware of it. Absolutely. Right. So this first point on this slide is again thinking in terms of the many conversations that Keith and I have had on custody transfer and how he has use cases that absolutely need it. I believe that this formulation preserves that capability. That is, the idea here is that when you've got a portion of the end-to-end DTN network path that cannot be traversed successfully by any of the reliable convergence layer protocols that we've defined so far, TCP/CL or LTP or others, that encapsulating the bundle in another bundle whose destination is the convergence layer next hop provides that capability. It enables the transmission on that segment of the path to be unidirectional in each direction, to follow different paths, and for the transmission between the two to be over links that are intermittently connected and possibly very long delay. So I think that's the number one advantage I see, is that the advantages of custody transfer are retained in a context that I think makes sense in the overall DTN architecture. The second advantage that I see is that removal of custody transfer from bundle protocol substantially simplifies bundle protocol and simplifies implementations. There will be potentially some implementations that would not want to support custody transfer, and or might want to not support it initially but add it later on. And I think this structure supports those kinds of implementation efforts. I'm thinking in particular of hardware implementations or firmware implementations where the complexities of custody transfer might be difficult to support, at least in an initial round of FPGAs, that sort of thing. The interface, I think, is quite clean here in that the bundle and bundle encapsulation protocol is a self-contained, I think, well-structured specification within which custody transfer operates without relying on inserting any new procedures into bundle protocol itself. The endpoints of the custody transfer are functionally convergence layer endpoints, even though they happen to be bundle protocol endpoints. It's tunneling. An advantage, I think, that is less obvious is that we've been thinking about bundle and bundle encapsulation for a long time as a mechanism that supports an additional layer of security for, in particular, security against protection against traffic analysis, and that's because the encapsulated bundle can be encrypted as the payload of the encapsulating bundle, and the destination of the encapsulating bundle can be anything at all, and something innocuous. And once the bundle reaches that interim destination, at that point it can be extracted from the encapsulating bundle and routed to its real destination in a safe part of the internet where you're not worried about traffic analysis. Next slide. Something that I had not expected when I started trying to write this into the BIBE spec is that it simplifies custody transfer itself. There is no need to deal with the partial custody transfer procedures that we talked about at the last meeting that, as I thought about it over a longer time, had been lurking in custody transfer in RFC 5050 all along, that it was always going to be a huge problem if there were fragmentations of custodial bundles on the end-to-end path. We had no way of dealing with it. It just wasn't even considered in RFC 5050. And one way or another, it was going to be a huge problem. Well, this makes that go away, because if there's fragmentation between the source and destination of the convergence layer bundle and bundle encapsulation transmission, that's not a problem, because by definition the bundle has to be reassembled from fragments at the destination, and no matter what the fragmentation was, the bundle that is going to be acknowledged in a custodial acknowledgement is the entire bundle, reassembled from whatever fragmentation happened on that short path. And again, there's no need for any special procedures in forwarding nodes that don't want to take custody, because the forwarding nodes that don't want to take custody are just forwarding nodes. The custody is only happening at the source and destination. Everything else that happens to be in between, they're forwarding. There's no expectation that they can or need to or even will take custody of the bundle. Only the source and destination are the custodians. It's compatible with multi-point delivery, which has always been an issue in custody transfer in RFC 5050. You look through RFC 5050 and it will say everywhere that multi-point delivery of custody transfer is undefined. Well, there's good reasons for that, right? Because if you go with the original RFC 5050 definition of custody transfer, if there were multiple possible custodians, custody acknowledgements would be received from multiple places, and the current custodian would have no way of knowing which ones are sufficient to authorize deletion of the bundle that it's taken custody of. There might be multiple possible custodians that refuse. There might be multiple possible custodians that receive it and don't say anything at all, and the current custodian has no way of knowing anything about how many copies it needs to resend. In this formulation, that goes away entirely, because if there's a multi-point delivery, then each of those points, each of those neighbors that you would forward the bundle to, can be a custodian. You send it custodially over a convergence layer hop that happens to be bundle protocol BIBE, and each one of those transmissions is a separate custodial transaction and is book kept individually in the implementation. So suddenly we gain the ability to do custody transfer through a multicast tree, because each of the branches of the multicast tree is its own custodial transmission. One more point, and I think this is the last one, is that several years ago, a visiting researcher at JPL worked out procedures for bundle delivery time estimation based on contact plans, the basis for contact graph routing in the ION implementation of DTN, and that work was published. There's still more things to do along that line, but I thought that at the time that was a very promising way of getting a plausible idea of how long it would take for a bundle to reach a destination, and over a range of probabilities, and that in turn is I think a plausible way of estimating the round trip time for a custodial transmission, and given that, this approach offers the promise of reasonably efficient custodial transmission, because the round trip time may be something that you can estimate with some accuracy, which we never could do before. And the key to that is that the next custodian is the destination of the encapsulating bundle. You know who it is. You can estimate how long the bundle will take to reach that destination. So I think there's a lot of attractive features to this formulation. Next slide. There are a couple of disadvantages that I think we all need to be aware of and spend some time talking about. One is there is a little bit of extra overhead because you encapsulate the original bundle in another bundle, and that means that there's another header, a primary block, and extension blocks put onto the front of it. I'm very sensitive to overhead. We care about that a lot in spaceflight operations communications. We don't have an awful lot of spare bandwidth, but even given that, I would say as long as the bundles are not tiny, the additional overhead is a tolerable cost. I think the advantages are compelling enough to motivate using this formulation, even when there's a concern about overhead. And the other is, and I'm sure this is going to come up in discussion, the key difference between custody transfer in this formulation and in RFC 5050 is that you must know in advance who the next custodian is going to be. Because that's the destination for the encapsulating bundle. I think that there's been a sense for some time that there were important use cases that where that was not the case, and I'm certainly I think we need to talk about those. My own personal expectation is that in realistic operational use cases, you pretty much always know who you want the next custodian to be. I think in all of the use cases that Keith has identified, for example, the next custodian is known. It may be 2 or 3 bundle hops away, but you do know who you want it to be. If you genuinely don't know who you want to take custody, then again, I will argue, if you don't know who you want to take custody, then you have no way of knowing when to retransmit. And in that case, I think it's I think I would argue that the potential impact on network performance is I would say not acceptable. But that's that's my own personal opinion on it. I would say that opportunistic forwarding is not necessarily incompatible with this formulation, because in opportunistic forwarding, I will propose that the next custodian is always the neighbor, right? You discover a neighbor and you want to do custody transfer out to the destination. Great. The next custodian is the neighbor that you've just discovered. If they don't want to take custody, then it's not clear that you want to send them a copy. If you want to send them a copy anyway, you can, and in that event, you maybe don't want to turn on the custodial retransmission switch. I think that the advantage of being able to do somewhat reliable custodial retransmission by knowing who the next custodian is and knowing the round trip time on that basis outweighs the advantages of being able to operate in an environment where the next custodian is unknown. I think that's the end of my slides. And so any questions?
Within a DTN network, many nodes, say node 1, 2, 3, 4. Node 4 is destination, node 1 is the source. And I know that from node 1 perspective, node 2 and 3 are custodians, right?
Okay.
And there are possible additional nodes in between. And
okay.
So when node 1 does that, it will address to node 2 as custodian, right? In the destination of the encapsulating bundle, right?
I would say if it knows that node 2 and node 3 are
custodians,
are potential custodians,
yeah,
that it could address the encapsulating bundle to node 3 and have it go directly that way.
Okay.
And not expect custody to be taken by node 2.
It won't, because it won't be addressed to
right.
node 2.
And
but then
I think that's an operational option, but you could sort of do it either way.
Okay, but then if it's what you said summarize as I only have really one custodian in my network. But if I want to use many, because I mean it's a very unreliable path and it may take forever between for whatever reasons, my question is, so node 2 will actually decapsulate and re-encapsulate, right?
Yes.
So how does node 1 tells node 2, node 3 is the next one? Or it doesn't know, or it doesn't?
Well, okay, so I think there's 2 answers to that. One is it can be argued that it should not tell node 2 that, right? Because it's source routing and maybe that's not a good idea. The other is that if it really wants that to happen, and I think we should thank Lloyd Wood for pointing this out on the email list, you can do that, right? Because Node 1 could encapsulate the original bundle in a bundle that is whose destination is Node 3, and then take that and encapsulate it in a bundle whose destination is Node 2. So you can do the source path routing if you want to. It's probably not a good idea, but if you want to, I think you can do it that way.
Okay. So that means unless you do that kind of trick, it's kind of a up by up custodian thing.
That's right. Yeah, but I think that's
up by
consistent.
Up depending on the knowledge of
right,
the custodian to the next one.
Right, and I think that's
okay.
That in itself is consistent with what RFC 5050 did. Right, you could have multiple custodial hops on the end-to-end path, and you can still do that. The difference in this formulation is you need to determine in advance who the custodians are at each hop.
John Dowdle. Thanks, Scott. Really interesting. My initial reaction of, oh, you wanted to take custody transfer out of 50/50 BIS, great. Put it in bundle, not convinced, but you make some interesting arguments there. Do you, in the world of opportunistic forwarding, I'm keen to be able to move custody in more than one direction.
Yes.
So sort of multipath thing.
Absolutely. Yes.
Do you think that this supports multipath custody transfer?
I think it absolutely does. Yes, and I would say it does that because suppose you're sending 4 different copies, right? You send one opportunistically, and you may not get there. It may or may not. So you hold on to the bundle, and you're going to send it again to the next discovered neighbor. On each of those transmissions to each of those neighbors as you discover them, I would say on each one you would do a custodial bundle encapsulation transmission to that custodial node, and that node in itself then would extract the encapsulated bundle from the encapsulating bundle and could determine on its own whether the next hop on its path to the destination needed to go over a bundle encapsulation, or could just be sent over some other reliable convergence layer protocol.
Okay, thank you. Last one. You said a couple of minutes ago that I originally had this in my head as that all nodes in the network need to support custody transfer. I think you mentioned a couple of minutes ago that you could send more than one bundle hop away and get the distant node to accept custody.
Yes.
Is that correct?
I would say that's correct. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
The intervening bundle hops would not be custodial. The transmission between those might very well be reliable. The custody signal would come from the destination of the encapsulating bundle.
Okay, thank you.
Rick Taylor. Thanks, Scott. I like this for 2 reasons. First off, there's always been a danger in my mind that 50/50 BIS with custody transfer inside became very close to routing. And there's always been a sense in the working group that 50/50 BIS should be about transport and not really touch on routing, because it's a pretty open research area in places. I think we've got some ideas of how it might work coming out of the research group. And so I like the fact that the separation of custody transfer out of 50/50 BIS kind of puts custody transfer and it's almost routing into its own document. The other part I like is bundle in bundle is going to happen. And so we may as well define it properly somewhere.
I agree completely.
I know there's been a lot of pushback about, oh, we don't need tunneling, it adds overhead. We don't need tunneling, it adds overhead. But people are going to tunnel. So let's define it. So I'm in favor of the separation and actually describing both of it.
Thanks.
Hang on. Yeah, John Dowdle, as JavaScribe. Ed's asking a question. Ed Brain.
In Bp Sac, we had difficulty with security destinations because it presupposed routing information. If you select a custodian that is more than one hop away, will we run into the same problems as when we try to define security destinations?
That's a fair question. I think we don't. And the reason I think we don't is that because we're doing this at the convergence layer, the route from the current custodian, the local custodian of the bundle, and the next custodian can be entirely defined by the routing protocol, right? The route that if you're going from A to D, and there are bundle routes, bundle nodes in between, the convergence layer protocol BIBE does not know or need to know anything about the specific nodes along the route. That can be handled entirely by the routing. So it is a little bit sort of brain bending because it is bundle protocol at both levels, but I think it avoids the problem that we very properly, I think, identified and reacted to in the BSP specification. That is the convergence layer transmission is something that we already have in the architecture. I think there's a clean separation between what essentially is end to end at the convergence layer and the route that the bundle takes to get from one end to the other at the convergence layer.
Can I jump in there? Sorry, Rick Taylor again. I seem to remember during the discussion about the removal of security destinations in Bp Sac, one of the reasons given for removing it was we could do this with bundle-in-bundle encapsulation. So I think there's a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy here.
I think that's exactly right. I think that was part of the idea of bundle-in-bundle encapsulation from the beginning, precisely.
Okay, so next question, Scott. Are you asking for bundle-in-bundle encapsulation to be custody transfer to be accepted as a working group document? Or do you want to do another rev on this, or what are your feelings?
If the sense of the room is that this is ready to go, then I think we should go ahead with it because we're time is ticking along. If we need to spend another cycle talking about it first before everyone is comfortable with it, I'm fine with that. Either way is okay.
Okay. Do you want to spend some time? Would you like us, the chairs, to ask the sense of the room and check on the mailing list, or do you want to take some time?
I personally believe that this idea is mature, and I don't know of anything that I would want to do on it in the next 4 months. I think it's ready.
Okay. Okay, so who in the room has actually read this? Can I just say a brief show of hands? Not a great deal. Okay. Of those who've read it, how many don't think this is ready to be accepted as a working group document and you'd like Scott to go away and rethink it? I'm seeing none. Obviously, that's a very low number, so we're going to take this to the list and okay, so anyone listening to the audio stream, please get on the list as soon as you get a chance, i.e. when it's actually daylight, wherever you are, and raise any objections because, and obviously we will get the announcement on the list rather than in the room, but I as a chair, think this is probably worth taking forward as a working group document, but we'll confirm in the rest. John?
Yeah, John Dowdle. Just a point of order, really, I suppose. So, as you mentioned just now, I think somebody's going to do, they're going to want to do bundle-in-bundle anyway. Personally, I think this is worthy of working group adoption anyway. Question is, does it have to be absolutely perfect before the working group adopt it? I would suggest not.
No, the question wasn't, is this perfect? The question was, is this worth the working group's time?
Yes. Personally, I think yes.
Thank you.
So next up we have Ed Brain, who is hopefully able to remotely participate. I can see him on Meet Echo. Ed, if you're there, can you try pressing whatever buttons are involved at your end?
Okay, I think I pressed those buttons.
You're very loud and very small. We'll see if we can try and make you full screen somehow.
Okay. Yes, maybe I can turn into being very large and very quiet.
There we go. We can see you, Ed. So can you control your slides from there? Or do you
I don't think so. I think I'll need you to flip for me.
Okay, just shout next. Okay, on you go.
Okay. Hi, my name is Ed Bahrain. I'll be presenting the Bp Sac updates. This will be the 05 version of Bp Sac, and we talked about the 04 version last time. We received a couple of comments in the meeting, and then I received a few comments directly since the meeting. Some got rolled in to the 05 and some didn't, and I'll address the ones that didn't get in before we had to upload the latest version. Next slide. I'm not sure if the next slide is up.
The next slide's up, Ed. Sorry, we're trying to fiddle with the volume. You're incredibly loud.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can try and speak softly. So I wanted to go through a summary of Bp Sac for those. I guess what I wanted to start with was to ask who in the room has read the Bp Sac document, anything from 04 or 05.
We have 2, 3, which is, yeah, not a vast number in the room, Ed.
Okay, so let me start. I have a couple of slides of summary, and then the updates from 05, and then the outstanding comments, and then addressing the Cipher suites. So if we go to the next slide. The next slide, so this summarizes the major points of the Bp Sac approach. The first, of course, is the motivation. Why do we feel we need a Bp Sac protocol? Bp Sac is meant to be an in-bundle security mechanism. What this means is for the cases where different blocks inside of a bundle need different security services. And this is to try and recognize the fact that sometimes not all blocks are put in a bundle by a single source, or when they are put into a bundle by a single source, they may represent different kinds of information. And a classic example is a case where a user would want a payload block to be encrypted, but may want other extension blocks to only be integrity signed so that others along a path could look at them. The reason we point that out is if you don't want in-bundle security, there are other ways of trying to secure BP. Of course, users can protect their own data at the application layer and give ciphertext or payloads that have already been encapsulated using other standards. For example, if a user was going to apply something like CMS and generate a CMS document, if you will, as the payload, that could be sent along and give users end-to-end application layer security. Similarly, and as Scott touched on earlier, users could select a secure convergence layer protocol if they exist in the network and also get security from that perspective through a chain of trust. So Bp Sac is meant to address the case where the security is implemented in the bundle itself by the BPA, not by the users and not by the convergence layers.
Sorry, Scott's got a question. Sorry.
Actually, just a comment, Scott Burley, and I wanted to add an additional note on motivation, which is protection of data at rest. If you're doing multi-hop transmission and the data resides in a bundle node somewhere along the end-to-end path, I will contend that it needs to be secured while it's sitting on that node rather than only while it's in transmission between nodes.
Yeah, completely agree. And that I believe is in the spec. I just didn't pull it into these slides. So if we take that as so some of the driving motivations for the document, the next thing the document talks about are what are the design decisions around Bp Sac. The major ones that came out was, of course, that different blocks in a bundle can and should have different security, that the processing order of those blocks at the various receivers must be unambiguous, and that we must be able to add new Cipher suites at future dates as more come available. Next slide. So then the spec goes into what does it actually mean to have security inside of a bundle, and to do that we use extension blocks to house security mechanisms. In that we have a confidentiality mechanism and an integrity mechanism. We decided some meetings ago not to have a separate authentication mechanism. There's a fair bit of treatment in that in the document, and we've also made it a topic of at least 2 or 3 working groups in the past. So for the blocks that we define, we have a block format, what we call an abstract security block, which was a concept kept from the original BSP, and that abstract security block is recognizing the fact that all of the 2 security blocks that we use in this spec, the BIB for block integrity block and the BCB for block confidentiality block, have a fair bit in common. They both capture the list of targets to which they apply. They both capture sort of that key information as part of Cipher suite configuration, and they can both hold extra data associated with the results of applying the Cipher suites. The block integrity block itself holds a signature or signatures across the set of targets that it applies to, and the confidentiality block notes that its targets have had their block data replaced with the results of an encrypting Cipher suite. And the confidentiality block may also carry any additional results, such as additional authenticated text that is beyond just the Cipher text that would be produced by a confidentiality encrypting Cipher suite. So then, another interesting part about the block format was we did come back and make an optimization several working groups ago that said an individual security block can target 1 or more other blocks in the bundle. And this was meant to capture the case where if you made it a one-for-one mapping between a security block and a single security target, you may have cases where multiple blocks need to be signed or multiple blocks need to be encrypted with the exact same key information, with the exact same Cipher suite parameters. And at that point, you're just repeating redundant information in the bundle. And it's far more efficient to simply have a single security block that says the security controls and configurations in this block apply to this range of targets. We did originally have a concept of a separate CMS block in Bp Sac. Through significant discussion in this working group and in some other groups, we said that that was probably not something that we were going to pursue in the core Bp Sac document, and we created a section that said if other specifications wanted to define new kinds of security blocks, there were certain considerations that needed to be put in so that new security blocks would be compatible and could coexist with the security blocks in this document. Finally, there was a section on block processing rules. Again, determinism is important here. There were many cases in the original BSP where we lost determinism, and we wanted to make sure that we didn't have that issue again. So there were some rules there in terms of if a BCB target is encrypted, then integrity on that target. If there's integrity on that target, it must also be encrypted. BIBs don't target BCBs or blocks protected by BCBs to avoid circular dependencies. If you do those kinds of things, then at a receiver, you can come up with a strict processing order for security blocks, and that's something that's helpful. Next slide. And so then as we finish up some of these, we come back and say that we really don't want to apply security directly to bundles whose payloads represent fragments. In that case, we would recommend some kind of encapsulation mechanism, such as Bp, if you want to turn that fragment into a non-fragment block by encapsulating it and applying security services to it. And then finally, nodes themselves determine by security policy if they are the destination. As we mentioned just prior, there were concerns if a source node tries to assert a security destination, because that starts implying routing decisions at the BPA layer itself. It is better to have the individual receivers determine whether they feel that they are the security destination and should be processing these blocks. We've created a security considerations area to this document, which attempts to list out the attack types we see in a DTN and mapping how BCB and BIB apply in these cases. And then we also, as part of those security destinations, make the argument for why security policy should be out of band configured in the network and not included in the bundle itself. While confidentiality and integrity blocks can be included in the bundle, the policy that says whether the block should exist or shouldn't exist, or if they are existing, what kinds of keys should or should not always be used, that's dangerous to put into the bundle, because if you do go through a malicious BPA, and that BPA may drop blocks, even if a BPA can't re-sign or add new blocks or intelligently modify blocks, they can certainly drop those blocks from the bundle. And if the blocks that are drops are ones that are carrying security policy, then the receiver wouldn't have all the information necessary to handle the implementation of its security policy. So that's a brief overview of the Bp Sac document for those who have not had a chance to read it, or who haven't read some of the latest drafts. What I wanted to talk about next were just what are the updates since the 04 version. Next slide, please. So in general, there were some minor editorial cleanup through the sections. If you do a diff between 04 and 05, you'll see some wordsmithing and some correction of grammar. The major updates are in section 3.5, the block representation. We did add something that was missing, which is to really just explicitly state you can't have duplicate targets in a target list for a BIB. We then added an illustration for both how we think Cipher suite parameters and security results as fields would be represented in the security block. One of the things that then we referred to section 3.10, which we talk about on the next slide in terms of how those would be populated. Next slide, please. So on section 3.10, originally we had put into the Bp Sac document the list of common security Cipher suite parameters and result IDs. And one of the comments that we got back was really Bp Sac should not be inventing their own IDs for these things, that there would be other registries that we should try and look at. COSI was one that was brought forward. And I read through the COSI documents, and really it looked like the Cipher suite parameters and the result IDs were based on the Cipher suite itself. And so that's what we tried to adopt as a philosophy in Bp Sac. I've cut and pasted the text of the specification here, but essentially what it is saying is that a BIB or BCB block must have something in it, and that's part of the block format that says this is the Cipher suite that we are using. And then the parameters, the key information, the result IDs that are associated with that Cipher suite, the identification of them, how they are CBOR encoded, how they should be interpreted, is really up to the Cipher suite definition itself, and isn't something that we would put as a registry in Bp Sac. Next slide. We cleaned up some of the canonicalization area for Bp Sac. It's noted that the primary block is now immutable and therefore does not need a custom canonicalization. And additionally, really all of the non-primary blocks can be canonicalized just as they are in Bp BIS, with small exceptions. The exceptions being that when we are canonicalizing for confidentiality, then we only include the block-specific data, because that's the only data that is turned from plain text into cipher text. And then the other is we we choose not to include reserve flags when we do canonicalization for integrity or confidentiality in the case that reserve flags are not preserved or somehow changed along a route. We removed the conformance section, which was section 11 in 04. The only text of the conformance section there was that some thought should be given to authentication. We didn't think that that sentence or two really warranted a whole section in the document. For the IANA considerations, we will need a registry for Cipher Suite identifiers, and we do need to allocate block types for BIB and BCB, and then we added a reference for COSI at the end. Next slide. So what we have presented in terms of updates were the the observed changes from the last working group and from some review that did not get to the list, and I'm encouraging reviewers to post to the list. After 05 was posted for this working group, we did get some additional comments, which I've listed here, and I think that author will also be posting this week to the mailing list to start the discussion. None of the issues that came back were really particularly significant. There was some discussion that says even the reduced discussion in 3.10 about how Cipher Suite parameters and results are stored would be too much, and couldn't Bp Sac simply say that the block in that scenario is really opaque, and that it's completely up to the Cipher Suites as to how they populate it, and is the concept of Cipher Suite parameters versus security results itself presupposing a design of the Cipher Suite. And we can certainly look at that. The reason why I say that's minor is that the text that we have now in Bp Sac relating to this area already points to the Cipher Suites themselves as providing the definitions and the enumerations and the format of these things. The other is that there were a couple of cases, I counted 5, where we felt that must is being overused, and I agree with them, and they're relatively easy to change. And then in section 822, and this is in the security considerations area where we're providing an analysis of Bp Sac in the context of certain types of attacks, there's an assertion that sign and encrypt implies a certain level of security strength. Essentially, that an attacker cannot successfully modify a bundle if they cannot decrypt the bundle. And that if you really were to split hairs, there are some people who would come back and say that's really maybe not always the case, and instead maybe the appropriate security verbiage is that you require an INDCCA2 encryption scheme, and there are some other text associated with that, which again we would put up to the mailing list. None of that actually changes the protocol, and it doesn't significantly change the analysis, but it would be a correction of the assertions that are made in the security analysis. Next slide. One of the things that was brought up at the last working group was that Bp Sac could go forward in its current form, but would require at the very least an interoperability Cipher Suite. And so I have posted a draft Cipher Suite that says here is a common integrity and a common confidentiality Cipher Suite that should be used for Bp Sac for interoperability. We picked something that was relatively simple, not certainly as simple as something like HMAC SHA-1, but HMAC SHA-256 and AES GCM 128 are both common Cipher Suites. They're well known. They are both represented in COSI, which means that they also have a predefined sort of representation in CBOR, which would also be helpful since these will be BPBiz extension blocks and BPBiz is going into CBOR. So that is a draft, and we probably aren't going to ask for that to go into last call right now. I think it would be good to get some other eyes on it, but probably by the next working group meeting, I think it would be ready to go. Next slide. So to sort of wrap up, we really haven't seen any significant concerns expressed so far in Bp Sac. Certainly moving from 4 to 5, we did address the issues that we have so far. The largest remaining issue seems to be any discussion of the comment of whether Bp Sac says that Cipher suite parameters and security results are simply opaque and to be determined by the Cipher suite, or whether it enforces a key value scheme and then just allows the Cipher suites to enumerate the keys and provide the encoding of the values. I think we can probably resolve that without much issue. And then I think probably by the next working group meeting, the interoperability Cipher suites, which are out there in draft form now, would also be ready to go. So that is the current status of Bp Sac. So at this point, we're really not aware of any significant issues that would prevent this from going forward.
Thanks, Ed. We've got a couple of questions here. Or one.
That's okay. I'll ask two. Spencer Dawkins, the Responsible Area Director. And this one's for Ed. Just making sure I understand. The reason you need a new registry for Cipher suites is because this is going to be this is the list of the ones that are specific for Bp Sac, or is that right? Or
yeah, that was the thought. Certainly, there are cases where we would point solely to existing Cipher suites, but in our security considerations area, we mentioned that the nature of DTNs, particularly things such as security at rest, would likely provide constraints or recommendations to Cipher suite parameters specific to existing in a DTN. And that would probably mean defining new Cipher suites.
Okay, so that's an excellent answer. I guess my next one is probably for the larger working group. When do you all expect to be sending this for IETF last call?
Well, that was the record. This is my next question to the room.
I will let you all chair the working group.
Does the room, and by extension those on the audio stream, think this document is ready for last call? Ed said he had a couple of little nits he wanted to sort out as part of last call. It needs some more public review on the list, but I think Ed is aware of that, and I know some of his off-list reviewers have been asked to post their reviews on the list. Of those in the room, can I see a hand if you've read this recently? I asked this, there's 3 or 4, isn't there? Of those, any of you think this isn't ready and that you would have reservations of this going to last call?
John Dowdle, is it worth getting an early security ID review? Do they do that sort of thing?
Yes, I believe they do that sort of thing. So we can certainly request an early security AD review as it goes into last call.
They absolutely do. This is Spencer Dawkins again, and just as an advertisement for this, pretty much all the review teams and directorates will do a review as requested. So you don't even have to, you don't have to wait till you're close. Transport is doing a review for a 6-load document that the working group is considering adopting, but they want to know what they're getting into. So the review teams are really becoming a lot more helpful and a lot less of a source of late surprises.
Sounds like a soft suggestion from our AD that a SEC directorate review as soon as possible might be a good thing to save any late surprises. We'll take the final question on last call to the list, but it seems to be the opinion amongst those who've read this, but it's good to go. The only concern that's been expressed to me is the security guys like to see more comment on the list to show that the working group has looked at it. So please some comment on this.
And I think we have to wait until VP this is out before getting the security. So I think it's pipeline. VP this first and then BP second.
So just to cover our private conversation, Mark raises the point that one thing that will cause BP Sec to drop out of last call like a stone is that if we suddenly make a change to BP BIS, BP, a 50/50 BIS. So I'm sort of looking at Scott and his team, given that 50/50 BIS is in last call and the working group believes it's pretty stable now, we're fingers crossed that's not going to wreck the process for BP Sec.
Because it depends on the IETF last call and ISG, right? So if the ISG or IETF last call results into, oh, let's change BP this significantly, then BP Sec would have to change significantly together.
Scott Burley, I'm at this point I do not anticipate any changes to any significant changes to BP BIS. There may be some that I'm not aware of, but as far as I know, I think it's stable at this point.
No. Apparently the chair's mic wasn't working. It is now. Good Lord. Yeah, apologies for those who could only quietly hear me.
So I think we're Brian now.
So next up, Brian Sipos, if you're there. Ed, I'm going to press the red button and make you do. Oh, he's gone. Excellent. Brian, can you hear me? Whatever time zone Brian is in. I have to press the red button. What happens? Do I just press the button? Hello, Brian. We can see you. Sorry. He's gone. I've ejected him. No, press it again.
Okay, that was my bad button push.
Go ahead, Brian. I promise not to touch anything.
Okay. So this presentation is even shorter than the last IETF one, and it represents even fewer changes, and hopefully the final changes for TCP CL before. So next slide, please. And I'm just going to discuss in here changes since the last draft revision, which are very few, and then open up to questions after. So next slide, please. So these next two, I believe, slides are identical to the last presentation and are just included for background information. The motivations and drive for this update to TCP/CL hasn't changed since it was originally proposed. And the point is just to both simplify and correct what was already a proven convergence layer in TCP/CL v3. So next slide, please. So we are continuing down the road of not making any major changes to the workflow of TCP/CL. The current v4 workflow is simplified. There are fewer branches and fewer options than in v3. We now have a proposed new set of IANA registries for the type codes and reason codes for TCP/CL v4, just to completely separate them from v3, since the registries themselves are easy to create, and it makes it more obvious that v3 is v3 and v4 is v4. If somebody is actually implementing both versions, they will probably notice that the codes which have shared semantics between the two versions, are numerically identical in the proposed registries, but they are separate tables. And since the workflow of V3 is preserved, there are only a few additional types and codes in those new proposed tables. Next slide, please. So edits since the last IETF have been that there has been no change to what's been written regarding the transport security using TLS. And it is clarified that TLS is mandatory to implement as part of the CLV4, but optional to use for any particular session. And it's negotiated per session. So it's a combination of the two endpoints establishing the session and whether or not TLS is to be used. As I mentioned on the last slide, we're proposing separate IANA registries just to keep the two namespaces independent of each other. And protocol extensions have been added to the contact header, although the form of the extension is defined in the CL spec. No uses of the extension are defined right now. And then the very last change is, as a suggestion off the working group, the individual message content headers have been modified to make the fields octet aligned, which avoids bit packing and in some cases avoids having unused flags for certain types of messages. So next slide, please. And this is the last in the deck. So all of the comments to date, at least, I believe have been incorporated into the current spec. And this is good in that there are no, as far as I know, open issues, but there is not, as far as I've read, a lot of concurrence in the current state. So that's something to bring up. And another thing to mention, although I realize now that I omitted the link from this presentation, although the last presentation does include it, there is a working implementation that's very, in a sense, trivial, just to prove out the protocol itself. But it is full-featured, and it is something that can be used for interoperability testing. And it's purely convergence layers. It has nothing to do with the agent itself. It's just getting what we would call a bundle, but is really just a fake data from one end of the session to the other end.
Thanks, Brian. I think we got a question.
Yeah, John Dowdle. I've got two. Actually, I think I'll probably save the second one for a bit later. In terms of the TLS thing, you say it's mandatory to implement, but optional. Sorry, optional to use. Why optional to use if it's mandatory to implement? Why not mandatory to use?
That was brought up as a question at the last IETF, and there was some strong objection from the point of view of, I believe, the IETF. I'm not sure what the right phrasing is. Not best practices, but security practices, that mandating the use of TLS across the board is not the right way to go, as far as getting approval from the wider IETF, I believe, and ISG.
Rick Taylor chipping in on this one. It's viewed as fairly standard IETF practice to mandate TLS to implement, but obviously you can't prevent somebody just choosing not to use it. So it's a good compromise position.
And the protocol as it stands provides a way to enforce the policy in both directions from an endpoint. So an endpoint can either declare in the contact header that it simply does not support TLS and don't try to use it because it's not going to work. But contrary to that, there's also the case where an endpoint can choose to say, yes, I do support TLS. And if the other side of the connection doesn't, then the connection is simply refused at the point of contact. So ideally, all of the endpoints would be set up to be co-operating.
Brian, can I ask you to post a link to your Python implementation if it's FOSS and you're willing to? Because that would can you put it on the mailing list? Would be really handy.
Yes, I can do that. I'll take a note.
Thank you. Any other questions?
So here's my second question. I read the security considerations section, and it was kind of ringing a couple of little alarm bells for me, because I'm helping to do the same in another working group, and I kind of got the feeling that because this is based on another protocol, we should somehow be referencing the security considerations in the other protocol, i.e. TCP here, and what new security uses are arising from the use of this effectively extending TCP.
Are you offering to suggest some text, John?
Yes, I think I am.
Okay. It's in last call at the moment. Okay, so this document is in last call. I suggest that perhaps, given we've got some queries and John is going to suggest some text, should we hold this in last call for a little bit longer? This is back to the milestones and we have lots of things lingering in last call. Conversation I had with Mark earlier about the number of documents we have in last call. Of course, July, August is very difficult because everyone is on vacation. So putting everyone in quotes everyone seems to be on vacation. So if we were to say, oh, well, standard 2-week last call, then we push the buttons. The concern is that a number of people are currently or just about to disappear on vacation. So we're tempted for those documents that are currently in last call to suggest a sort of end of August go ahead. So that gives the documents that are currently in last call, which is BP BIS, Bp Sac. Oh no, sorry, Bp Sac is not in last call yet. TCP CL. This is your chance to comment, do those final reviews, and then we'll get those buttons pushed and get it moved into the review queue for sort of the start of September.
Scott Burley. If we on the list determined that Bp Sac was also ready for last call, could we add it with the same end date?
I'd be happy with that. Well, we don't specify the end date. We just start. We push it up the chain, and then it takes on a life of its own.
It'd be nice if they were all. If they could all come out of last call at the end of August and start moving.
I agree that they probably will end up in sync at the very end of the queue.
Great.
Any other questions for Brian or no? Thank you very much, Brian.
Okay, and I'll await any comments that come in.
Yeah, comments to the list, please. So next up we have Ed. I've lost my agenda. So next up we've got Ed again. We have the same slides from Ed from last working group. He promises not to go through all of them in great detail again. He just wanted to raise some questions about the asynchronous management architecture in detail. Anyway, Ed, if you're there, I'll let you carry on.
Okay, I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
And the volume is appropriate now?
Yes.
Okay.
The
Hi,
window is small, however.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Can you make your window bigger? You're in a tiny. Is there? There we go. That's good.
Okay. So Hello, this is Ed again. I wanted to talk a little bit about the asynchronous management architecture. The reason the slides are the same is we didn't update the draft from the 05 version that was there at the last working group because we have not, of the people who have reviewed this document to date, we have gotten no additional comments saying that there's something specific we wanted to change through the working group. I did get a few emails this week related to whether or not there are things we wanted to add from a section point of view. But ultimately, when we started looking at network management quite a long time ago, we said that there's certainly a set of standards and ways of doing terrestrial network management, and how is it different in a DTN? And the answer that we came back was the asynchronous nature of this. The need to bake into a network management solution some level of automation and perhaps some level of autonomy. And the asynchronous, and that's sort of captured in terms of how do you manage a network asynchronously? Well, you need automation and autonomy to do that. So the AMA is a capture of what we think it means to manage a network asynchronously. The question from last working group was, does this document, or could this document satisfy the need for a set of network management requirements for DTN, or what would need to be added to this document to make it satisfy the requirements for that? So with that context, I wanted to briefly represent the materials and the topics that are covered in this document, and then ask the question, if there is something missing from the materials covered, what would it be, and could we adopt those materials or add to this document in the context of a working group item as opposed to just an internet draft from Ed?
Ed, can I hold you there for a second?
Sure.
Quick question to the room. How many here are completely unfamiliar with the asynchronous management architecture? Okay, so one or two. Ed, just because you've presented a lot of this before, can I ask you to keep this very concise, please? Because most here are very familiar, just to save on everyone's time and effort.
I am happy to not talk through any of the specifics. If we wanted to just go to a conversation on, do we feel there is something additional that we would have to add to this document to make it capture network management requirements, and could we do that in the context of a working group document?
I'd be happy as a chair to move on to that. I might refer those who haven't read this document. It is actually well written, and the slide pack, which is available in the meeting materials, is a good slide pack. So can I suggest those who aren't familiar with this catch up with it? And probably we jump ahead to a conversation. Do people have opinions about the asynchronous management architecture? Ed?
Well, so my opinion is that this, to me, although as the author I'm biased, is to come back and say this is what we felt defines what it means to asynchronously manage a network. We didn't break out requirements in terms of shell statements, but we did spend a fair bit of time explaining desirable properties, constraints, why we need asynchronous mechanisms and what those mechanisms should look like and what features they need to provide. And so I think from that, we could either add a set of specific requirements and assumptions and constraints, or simply say that they are inferred in this document. There had been a previous out of the IETF network management requirements document, and we could adopt portions of that table of contents. The difficulty that we had when we were writing that up in the context of the IETF, if I recall, was that while we broke out different architectures and different scenarios because they looked different from a physical standpoint, many of them collapsed similarly from a network management standpoint. And many of them really came down to just needing that kind of asynchronous management that we're talking about here. So in terms of the things that make this document a little bit different from the network management requirements document, I don't know that we need whole sections on architectures and whole sections on system concepts beyond that which is already in the AMA.
Okay. I mean, Rick Taylor with the non-chair hat on, personally, I think this is incredibly useful work. This is useful for my day job, and also I think it's intellectually interesting to look at how do we manage disconnected networks. And it's an interesting problem and also very useful to solve. I think we could spend an awful lot of time wordsmithing the most perfect architecture document, but I think that might be a waste of valuable effort. I would prefer to see the architectural document being concise, to the point, and fairly general as an informational document without getting too caught up in the minutiae. And I think a lot of it is there already. I obviously need to do a good review of this document rather than just critiquing it at the mic. But I personally, I mean, I'm supporting Ed on this one. I think this is a valuable document. Do people think that, from my perspective, Ed has done a lot of work on this already. The IETF did a lot of work on this already. So we're not proposing burning a lot of cycles creating new documents. The suggestion would be to adopt this document as it currently stands, finesse it a little bit if required, and then it's a useful asset for the working group. Yeah, careful.
Marglasha, to add, this would be a target informational document, not a protocol document.
Yeah,
so
informational.
Yeah, John Dowdle, that was kind of my question. I can see this, I get this as an architecture document, I get it's informational.
Yes.
But what is the roadmap for this topic now? Is there an intent to go write another document that says this is something you can conform to?
If we look at the charter, it says we cannot work on the protocol itself. Therefore, it would be either a recharter or sending to someone else, or so. But I guess we need to discuss.
Okay.
Scott Burley, I'm just speaking in support of Rick's idea that we adopt this as a work group item.
So Spencer Dawkins is responsible AD. Having some familiarity with the charter, what I thought that text meant was that you would not go into business for yourselves and like say, oh, we're going to replace NetComp or something like that. So what I was wondering was whether you would be able to do like an applicability statement. Those are proposed standards. So that's something that people can conform to and stuff like that. Based on the architecture document. I'm not saying that you should. I'm asking if people have thought about it. And I'm kind of saying if that seemed like a good idea to you, it would seem like a good idea to me.
Just to respond to that, I know Ed and myself and various others have been talking to the various NetConf and NetMod groups, talking to there's a CBOR lightweight management group that's kicking off. I can't remember their name at the moment. The point of this document is to say here are the architectural requirements specifically to DTN, but they have applicability outside of the traditional DTN communities. So we've got some interest from some of the data center guys to say, well, actually, asynchronous management starts to become useful to us when data is moving so fast that you can't consider it, you can't do stop the world anymore because you lose billions.
So the definition of a delay is now light speed?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So light speed delay becomes relevant again. From my personal perspective is, yes, this isn't on the charter at the moment, but I think this is relevant work, whether it gets done in this working group or whether it gets done elsewhere or bits get done here, there, and everywhere. I see this as a multidisciplinary effort, not a DTN reinvents management for them, because there's not enough of us and we'll get it wrong.
Yeah. and that you don't have to. So what I'm, like I say, I want the working group to decide what the working group wants to work on, because that's what working groups do. If the working group decided they wanted to head off on that direction and thought it was the right thing to do, I would be supportive. So, like I say, just have that as a data point as you're having the conversation.
Mark, I think part of, to me, the answer of this is having at least some draft of what that would be. And then we can discuss if, and then, yeah.
This is Jefferson Nobre. I think that there are some specific parts of the old draft of DTN network management requirements that maybe should be, how can I say that, should be merged on this one. Other option is to leave this work as a new draft for the IETF or the NMRG team. So I don't know. I'm thinking about the span cycles to do that. So.
If you're willing to suggest, the comments on the mailing list is the best place to start. I mean, if currently this is a personal draft, if we accept it as a working group document, then I think it's quite legitimate to spend some time saying, well, how much work do we want to put on this? Are there ideas, as you say, that we can bring in from IETF or from other groups, ICNRG or whatever, and say, well, actually, we can use some of this and spin into a nicer document without reinventing the wheel or because I don't want to say that informational RFCs aren't useful, but I don't want, given that we have important things like BPBIS, Bp Sac, these core technology protocol stuff that we need to get through. I don't want to say, oh, let's stick some more things on the working group's desk and waste time on it, but get your ideas on the list, see whether it can be brought in. Okay, I'll just pull it back. How many people in the room think the working group taking this document on is a waste of our time and we have better things to do? So I'm asking for the negative. Who doesn't think this should be worked on in the working group? Yeah. Okay. And then how many people actively support this and are happy to contribute comments and reviews and good ideas? Okay. So that's a pretty good for this group, given I know some people are sitting in just to see what on earth we're doing. So obviously we'll take that to the list as well, just to confirm. But I think, Ed, people are happy, because you can't see the content of the room, that this is a useful piece of work for us. And it is a charter item.
Right. So Spencer Dawkins again. So I guess the thing I wanted to say on that was you're observing correctly, I believe, that this is not what DTN does particularly. But if DTN was chartered to do this as part of what DTN does, it seems more likely that you would get people who are not participating in DTN now in to work on this. So you may be looking at more than just the people in the room who would be the ones who would be doing the work. So just to mention that, this is something, again, I'm going to be sure and mention to the rest of the ISG and the IEB on our Friday afternoon session. Thank you.
Thanks, Spencer. I know, and following up from what I said earlier, Ed and I have been talking to Benoit and some of the things the net mod groups have been doing with what they did call Yang push, but asynchronous notifications, and building on that. We're not talking about protocol definition at this point. This document is about describing the DTN perspective of management. How that is addressed may well happen outside of this group. We may have a little magic DTN-y bit as part of a much bigger picture, and I think it is, you're right, beyond the scope of this group to solve and do all of that.
It can go somewhere.
I hope we can find a home for it at some point. Okay, any other comment, Ed?
No comments from me.
Thank you very much. Is that?
I think we're done. Oh, God. Sorry. Mark Nash here. So as chair, I'm trying to summarize the next action items. We haven't specifically asked the room, but I guess we're BPBIS is going to another working group last call, given the major change, structural change in it. We would ask for, and that would kind of end August timeframe for the working group last call, given that it's more than just small changes. We're actually removing custody in it, just to be precautious. So we would love to get people, saying if you agree with it, then just not be silent, but says, I read it, it's fine, go forward. We would like to get those kinds of emails on the mailing list. Custody transfer, we would ask for a working group adoption, in the next weeks. Maybe tomorrow we should ask, or this afternoon, and give a couple of weeks to respond, to confirm. Bp Sac, we would go working group last call.
With the Bp Sac, there is this. Sorry. With the Bp Sac, there's the second document of the interoperability Cipher suites. Yeah. The question for me is whether, and this is a question to the list, should that be rolled into the Bp Sac document as a section to say, if you're using Bp Sac, here are the Cipher suites that the IETF suggests you use, or should that live outside as a separate document? If it lives outside as a separate document, then it probably needs to be adopted and go into the last call alongside, because I can't see putting forwards a security protocol without a standard set of interop Cipher suites is going to work. My personal opinion is push the two together, but I think we'll take that to the list. Sorry, carry on, Mark.
Okay. Sorry. TCPCL, I think it's done. We may have additional comments. So let's say that by the end of August, we'll essentially close and then, push forward with BPBIS to the ISG. And AMA, the architecture document, we would ask for working group adoption, in the next days or week. Does that summary make sense to people? Or? Yes, John?
Sorry, yeah, John Dowdle. Just a jab a comment from Ed Brain. Question, at last working group, RAND seemed okay with these as separate documents.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah, I think it is, given that he separated the Cipher suites.
Yeah, so you can. Yeah. I think the point was at the time was that if you separate the Cipher suites from the core document, then you can up-rev the recommended Cipher suites without having to touch the core document. Mm-hmm. I think that was the idea, just in case someone suddenly breaks SHA-256 or Quantum. Quantum suddenly works and then. Okay, so does anyone have any final comment they want to make? Any questions, particularly in light of the custody transfer split out, which I thought was going to be a much bigger debate point than it has turned out to be? Any other business, basically? Otherwise, thank you all very much. Mark and I will do our best to get these, take it to the list comments actually on the list this time. And we'll see you all in Singapore and on the list. Thank you very much.
Actually works. No, no. Yes. That's probably